I feel like diet culture sets you up to never be good enough.
Did you burn 500 calories on the treadmill today? No? Me either.
I mean, anybody can sit with us. We're just really not about diet culture.
But literally, happiness doesn't come from a low-calorie, high-intensity life. I actually do like carrots.
I do too. They're my favorite.
Welcome to the Fit Fueled Free podcast.
So basically, diets suck. Hey guys, welcome to episode 57. I'm Jenna.
I'm Danielle.
And today we are starting our mini series that Danielle and I kind of teased about earlier in this season about the intuitive eating book that we are going to break down off of each of the 10 principles that the book gives. And so we're just going to be dedicating one episode per principle. So it's going to be a 10-part mini series to just kind of go over these 10 main principles that kind of stand behind and push the whole intuitive eating process.
Yeah, so a quick disclaimer here that this episode is for informational, educational purposes only. This is not for individual advice, and Jenna and I are not certified intuitive eating counselors, but we both use intuitive eating in our personal lives, and it's the end goal for me with my eating disorder and disordered eating patients, and it's actually part of the curriculum for the International Association of Eating Disorder Professionals certifications to become a certified eating disorder dietitian or therapist or whatever. It's part of the curriculum because that is ultimately what we're working towards. So we're not here to provide like a full-on summary of the chapters so that you don't have to read the book, but just kind of talking about it, like having conversations about why do we promote intuitive eating and why it gets so misinterpreted, and kind of talking through some of those things as well. Because if you guys saw on our Instagram page or Twitter, we were talking about how Jillian Michaels, probably like a month ago now, posted a video of herself reading the 10 principles of intuitive eating, which are available on their website, and just like making her own assumptions and commentary. It was very evident that she has not like dove into the text or really immersed herself in that, or even kind of posed a question as to why it would be a helpful thing for people. Yeah. And we always talk about intuitive eating, so we're just going to do, like Jenna said, deep dive into all of that. Something else that's really important, I think, to kind of disclaim before talking about intuitive eating is that we don't hold space in our podcast for intentional weight loss conversations. And again, we're not anti the person wanting to lose weight. We're just anti-intentional weight loss because of the harm that it causes. So intuitive eating is not a method of weight loss. You could lose weight or gain weight or remain neutral. It's about healing your relationship with food in your body. And that's why it's important to us and to the work that we do.
Yeah. Okay, and just to kind of give you guys a heads up so you know what to expect and what's coming in the upcoming episodes, I'm going to quickly read off the 10 principles just so you guys will know what the next 10 episodes are going to cover. So today, principle 1 is reject the diet mentality. Number 2 is honor your hunger. The third one is make peace with food. Number 4 is challenge the food police. 5 is discover the satisfaction factor. That is a mouthful. Say that 10 times real quick. Number 6 is feel your fullness. 7 is cope with your emotions with kindness. 8 is respect your body. 9 is movement, feel the difference. And then the last one, number 10, is honor your health with gentle nutrition.
Yeah, so these aren't meant to be necessarily like utilized in any particular order.
Yeah.
But in my personal experience with this and professional advice, ditching the diet mentality kind of does have to come first, because otherwise, absolutely. And we'll talk about that in a second, why it's not going to work otherwise. But then the gentle nutrition aspect, I really don't focus on nutrition for nutrition's sake, in the sense of like worrying about your micronutrients as much as getting macros and getting fed enough and redeveloping trust in your body. So I really love that that's actually the 10th principle, because by the time you've done some of this other work, you may be ready to kind of focus on what we typically think of as healthy, quote unquote, eating. So I want to read what their like recap is under principle number 1. So they each have like a paragraph that we'll talk about at the beginning of each episode. So throw out the diet books and magazine articles that offer you the false hope of losing weight quickly, easily, and permanently. So I'm going to repeat that. The false hope of losing weight quickly, easily, and permanently. Mm-hmm. Get angry at diet culture that promotes weight loss and the lies that have led you to feel as if you were a failure every time a new diet stopped working and you gained back all of the weight. If you allow even one small hope to linger that a new and better diet or food plan might be lurking around the corner, it will prevent you from being free to rediscover intuitive eating. So when you read through that quickly, it's easy to be like, okay, well, what does that even mean? Mm-hmm. But that paragraph actually is quite loaded because if we break that down, false hope, that's why I said that twice, because we talk about in our society now that we're generally moving away from diets. And I say generally because keto and intermittent fasting are still like running rampant and carbs are highly demonized right now. But it's the idea of, oh, I'm not worried about quick weight loss. I'm worried about sustainable weight loss, which is why I love that they put losing weight permanently in this sentence, because it's a reminder that we have no guarantee that we have long-term ability to change our body. And that is something that we've morphed the lifestyle diet into a promise of permanent change. And that is not something that anybody can guarantee. So getting angry at diet culture. So this was the thing, if anyone watched that video from Jillian Michaels that she was kind of going off on, that this takes away responsibility from the person. But I would like to say, and first of all, if Jillian ever listened to this podcast, hello, Jillian, I don't like hate you or anything. I just find some of the messaging around this to be problematic and want to kind of set the record straight as a eating disorder dietitian. But if we put personal responsibility onto ourselves for what our bodies look like, that means that anything we do, purchase, follow religiously is going to come back to being our fault. So that's problematic because that is this overarching systemic issue that isn't based in like reality. So sure, blame it on the people. It's their fault that their weight is not where it should be, but don't blame it on the systems that are perpetuating that. And so if you can get angry at it and realize I didn't fail, that diet failed me, I think there's so much empowerment that comes from that. And so that's any type of restrictive, rigid, controlling eating plan, counting calories, counting macros, doing a colon cleanse, like anything that you're doing that has any tie to wanting to lose weight is like what we're considering dieting. So then the last part of this, if you allow even one small hope to linger that a new and better diet or food plan might be lurking around the corner, it will prevent you from being free to rediscover intuitive eating. So I can understand someone who's never been exposed to this kind of taking that as a really harsh message, like, who are you to tell me that this is the way, the truth, and the light? Because, well, first of all, we all have a lot of like insecurities about diets because they consistently let us down. So why would hearing something like that, I could see where that could raise red flags. But that would be if you're approaching this as a diet to begin with, which happens all the time. And actually intuitive eating gets used by a lot of healthcare professionals to help people with weight loss, which is a complete misinterpretation and abuse of this system of principles. But it happens. So the reason you have to come to terms with getting rid of that hope is because when you are focused on weight loss, you're not going to be able to truly come back and listen to your body. Because if you're focusing on outside authority ruling what you're allowed to eat and how you're allowed to eat, right there, you've disconnected from your intuition.
Yep.
So if you think about how toddlers, almost every person is going to be born with intuition, unless you have some kind of like issue where you have to be tube fed or have some serious struggle that really does disconnect you, or your failure to thrive. Like there's a few situations that can happen, but most people are born and have that ability, like when they start eating, to be intuitive, meaning they stop eating when they're full. They ask for food when they're hungry. And it's not just the stop when you're full, eat when you're hungry diet, but they want to eat things that they're interested in eating. Like, ever try feeding a toddler something they don't want to eat? They don't want to. And it's like that primal instinct of things that their body is interested in without having the added brain knowledge that is beneficial, but also so detrimental that we have added. And they're not worried about the portion sizes. They're just doing what their body is asking them to do. And it's really quite amazing that we're born like that. And so to be able to start practicing coming back to that can be so alarming, because it's like a threat. If I start eating again, I'm just going to never stop. And that is a common concern, but that is not the truth. Because if you give yourself permission to do that, you will find regulation. It just can take a little bit of time, but I've seen it happen over and over and over again. And so it's kind of one of those things, is you don't know till you know, but you have to be fed up enough with what's not working as far as dieting and your weight loss journey. And if you have an eating disorder, I'm not saying that you have to not accept, but sometimes you do. Like, your body will change, and we have to be able to trust that it's going to be okay in order to work through those steps. And that's applicable for anybody who's just trying to heal their relationship with food. Something is going to make you want to trust in something better for yourself, and that's really like what intuitive eating is offering. Coming back to the original intuition our body has, so that you can have just a healthy relationship with food where you're not obsessed about it. It just is the way you fuel yourself, and it's enjoyable, and it's not a point of contention or stress or a matter of micromanaging your body.
And I think like you have to really be at a place in order to do this where you're really basically what you just said, like you're angry at the diet culture mentality, and you're angry at the system, because you can't really embark on this to begin with if you want it for any other reason than like for yourself. Like, you know, if you're just trying to reject the diet culture mentality for, I don't know, you know, a loved one or like a kid, like you need to do it for you, because, and you need to be at a place where you're like so tired and fed up with it, because like how many times have you heard either someone in your life or even like yourself be like, okay, well, like I'm just thinking like around like the holiday time, like I hear people all the time be like, oh, well, like once, you know, the holidays, and then I'm really going to get back on track, or then I'm really going to cut like back on like my intake and like get on my diet. And it just goes to show like there's such a yo-yo diet culture, and like that's exhausting. And like how many times have you tried that and it's failed you, you know? Like I think you just need to like it's important to assess like how exhausted are you of trying to do the same thing over and over again, and like continuously being let down, because that's what diets do, which is what we're saying.
And I do want to say as well that going back to intuitive eating is a privilege. And I know that word's being used all over the place right now, but in the sense that if you have food insecurity, it is going to be difficult to honor some of the principles of intuitive eating, because you may not be able to have access to enough food or access to certain types of food, which again, some of that's just an issue with how our society talks about the foods you have to eat, which we'll get into later. But if that is your case, I want to extend you compassion and remind you that there are going to be parts of this that you can still utilize and that you do deserve. So it's a privilege to be allowed to do this kind of work and to really fully dive into intuitive eating. But that doesn't mean that it's off limits. Like, this is something that's truly for everyone, but there are going to be absolutely certain barriers along the way for different people in different phases of life and socioeconomic statuses. And I think that's the reason that we talk about that is not because we're like, oh yeah, we're better because we can do intuitive eating. I don't use the word privilege in the sense of I think I'm better because I have that, but because I realize that it makes it easier for me to do certain things that others have a harder time doing. And that's why it's important to call that out, because it helps us with our awareness of the things that we're encouraging other people to do and what we're expecting of other people and just how we're messaging things and just shaping the overall concepts of healing relationship with food. And I wanted to touch on that because I saw the other day, for whoever follows Jamil, she had posted something about her skincare routine getting ready for the Emmys, I think, and someone had commented or DM'd her that she has really beautiful skin, and so she took a post to discuss how much easier it is for people who have a lot of privilege, aka wealth and time, to sleep adequately, to eat higher quality food that is, and again, I'm not saying it's good or bad, but it does make a difference, and to focus on all the things like the skincare products, like all of the self-care things that help, because she's pointing out that like I don't just have beautiful skin, it's the fact that I have the ability to like it is a privilege. And some people like went off on her like, oh, you think you're better than everyone, and I felt like, I mean, I don't feel sorry for her, and that wasn't the point, but it was like she was trying to call something out that really needs to be called out, because you are fed these messages that, oh, you should have skin like all these celebrities, but what do celebrities have access to that other people don't? And I had a dermatologist tell me that when Jenna and I went for her birthday, we got facials, and I told her I always find it interesting how people who have more money have such nicer skin, and she said the same exact thing. And that was the first time that I realized how much like skincare falls into the same category as like our diet culture as far as what's expected of people, and how much easier all of this is when you have more resources. And so anyway, I just feel very strongly about that, because no one who, well, I can't speak for everyone, but if you're talking about your privileges, it's not to boost yourself up. And if someone is doing that, they're not using that like information correctly, because the point is never to say, I think I have it better. It's to call out the fact that we have a lot of inequality and a lot of inequitable situations happening, and that makes a difference, and it needs to be discussed. So anyway, side tangent, but that can be a barrier for intuitive eating. And so for any healthcare professionals who want to promote this, like just make sure you're considering the socioeconomic status of the people you're talking with, because the conversations are going to be different if you have to have a conversation about how to help somebody afford their groceries rather than helping someone, you know, go to their favorite brunch place with their friends and try something that they are afraid of eating. That's a very different conversation. And you can really cause harm if you're not paying attention to that.
So I think it's important to just kind of educate yourself, because we're such a instant gratification people, like that's what we want instant gratification. So we really only think of the short-term effects that these diets have that are being promoted and shown to us, and you know, we always think that like, oh, it's a quick fix, or it's going to happen in this short amount of time, and it's like, okay, Potentially, yes. Like if it's your first diet, probably. If it's your 10th, 20th, 30th, probably not. But we are so driven by instant gratification that we're only looking at that short-term effect as opposed to the long-term. And diets honestly have incredibly damaging long-term effects that can give you problems and issues, years down the road from the 1 or 2 or 10 diets that you've embarked on. So diets can do biological and emotional harm to you and your body. And, I think it's important to note that like biologically, dieting does teach the body to retain more fat when new food is introduced, right? Like if you are restricting so much to the point that your body is in a starvation mode or you're cutting out food groups, it's like that is not sustainable for your body. So the second that you do start to regularly incorporate that food that had been restricted so long, or just like upping the calories to normal intake, because dieting decreases your metabolism, when you start to eat a more substantial and more sustainable amount of fuel, the body could respond in a way that retains, it like overcompensates because it doesn't know when am I going to be fed next. And I can even speak to that. Like when I was going through like my hormone and gut healing journey, like I was incredibly tiny for a time frame. And when I started to not run, so I wasn't like abusing my body with exercise, and I was starting to eat a normal amount that someone who is active, and just as a female in general, my body was like, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. And so we always kind of talk about like that set point range, which so many people get stuck thinking that it's like a 5 to 10 pound range, when in reality it can be up to like a 25 to 30 pound range. Your body can overshoot that as it's trying to regulate and figure out what is going on. So at a biological standpoint, dieting can really harm that. It also increases binges and craving, because we know this, if you're restricting a food, you're not allowing yourself to have it, or your brain is telling, the rest of your body that like, oh, well, you can have it this one time, but this is the only time you can have it, or this is the last time you're going to be able to have it. Like that's going to increase the craving, which is then going to further increase binges.
Yeah, and that's like true restriction of food, as in the sense like you don't have access to it, or even mental restriction where it's sitting right in front of you and you're berating yourself for not supposed to even be wanting to eat the food. Yeah. So it's both ways that works. Mm-hmm.
Your satiety cues start to decrease, obviously, because if you are ignoring your hunger cues in order to restrict or cut calories, you're ignoring that biological need when your body's telling you to eat, which is why intuitive eating can be so overwhelming for so many people to start, who start off with it, because they don't have those cues anymore, and they either don't know when to eat, or they're afraid that they're not going to ever stop eating, which we kind of mentioned at the beginning. Like there's all these fears wrapped around intuitive eating, such as like, I won't stop overeating, or I'm not going to know how to eat if I'm not following a plan, or I'm going to be out of control. And obviously the more work you do, the more those get reestablished, and we'll cover that later. But it can be super harmful not to have those satiety cues from your body, because that is something that we were created to have. Like that is something we were given like at birth, like how you were saying, like the toddlers. And so it can be super dangerous to not be in tune with those cues. And dieting obviously heavily affects that.
And it's also common to lose hunger cues, just because if you ignore it long enough. I hear this all the time from people, whether it's on the end of having a full-blown eating disorder, or it's just a busy person who is not listening to their body because they're not even thinking of taking care of themselves because of all the responsibilities and stress they have, that they just stop noticing hunger, because until it's so intensely strong that, again, you're going to overeat, quote unquote, or binge, because your body's like, oh my gosh, person, give me food because I'm really struggling right now. And then you feel like you have no control. But in all like reality, your body was needing that food all along. You just weren't allowing it, or you weren't listening to it. And again, that's not like you're a bad person thing. It's for whatever reason you didn't think you were supposed to be.
Yeah.
Sometimes I hear, not sometimes, this is a really common feedback I hear, but when people start to have hunger cues reestablished, they're like, oh, I'm hungry, as if like that's a bad thing. And hunger we're talking about next episode, but like that is important to have as well, but we demonize hunger so often.
We shame ourselves for feeling it,
and then we shame ourselves for not feeling full as soon as we think we should, based on portion sizes that we're taught are supposed to maintain the thin ideal.
I roll. Some other things that can be affected negatively by dieting is obviously eating disorders. That's a big one. You don't just wake up one day and have an eating disorder. It's usually the byproduct of something else. And a lot of times diets are one of the causes for eating disorders or disordered eating.
The statistic that's given in the book is that dieters are 8 times more likely to develop an eating disorder by the age of 15 than non-dieters.
Which is nuts.
Hello.
You want to say that again?
Dieters are 8 times more likely to develop an eating disorder by the age of 15 than non-dieters. So just remember that the next time you're faced with a teenager or child who is being encouraged to lose weight. Because just because you call it healthy eating does not mean that that isn't a diet if the intention is only on weight loss.
Correct.
And I have all the strong feelings on that, but children should never be targeted for weight loss ever. So anyway,
causes stress, obviously, emotionally and physically. It's correlated with feelings of failure, lowered self-esteem, so social anxiety, and obviously can like really erode and disrupt confidence and your self-trust.
And yo-yoing is also harmful to heart health. So like we talk about how damaging inflammation from having body fat is all the time, but literally no one talks about how harmful yo-yo dieting is to your actual like metabolic being. But that's real. And I'm not like a fear monger type, but it is something to be like, this does come with risk. It's not just the psychological harm, it's physical. And that's why it's so important that we talk about how this isn't necessarily going to be any kind of permanent change when someone goes on a diet, because you can't guarantee that. There's a 95% failure rate of dieting. So it just is what it is. It's also like a really stressful, like, time suck.
Oh my gosh.
Like all consuming.
About that. Because it ruins plans. It gets in the way with social situations. It can be incredibly stressful to plan a meal for a friend or, you know, a spouse. You have to like, you know, sit down and like articulate every little ingredient and meal that's going into your plan.
There's just so
much time
details that are so toxic, that are so normalized in our society.
And not to shame meal prepping, like,
no,
you know, on a weekend, like we'll sometimes meal prep so we have food ready that we can just throw together on the weekend, but we're talking like an obsessive, everything has to be perfect, and you have all those, you know, your portions completely planned the whole week, and there's no room for error, there's no room for flexibility, or you can't, you know, have a spur of the moment, go out to dinner with friends kind of deal.
So the other part about being able to kind of let go of the diet mentality is that you have to give up the tools of diet culture. So like obsessively weighing, measuring food. And I also would say tracking is one of those harmful behaviors. Again, I always say this, unless you're tracking to make sure you're eating enough because you've been asked to do that by a healthcare professional for healing purposes, there's no reason that you have to be constantly aware of what's going into your body, because we're not machines, so it doesn't actually matter. And then there's the whole bathroom scale, which is the bane of my existence, because it's just, those numbers are so hard to overlook. No matter how great someone feels, the number on the scale is such a barrier. And so I honestly recommend completely backing off of weighing unless it's something you have to do for medical stability, which there are a handful of reasons that would happen. But it doesn't really tell you that much information for the average person because of water weight that fluctuates, your hormones, your bowel movements, the types of workouts that you're doing. So it's not really a great tool anyway, but it becomes, we just like numbers and we like data points, and it's a way to measure, but it's not like a healthy or good measurement, even though we've been told that it is. I rarely ever see that being a benefit to people, other than, again, to medically monitor somebody who has to like weight restore.
And I can't tell you how many times I've had a client who I've worked with, their report to me has been like, I feel amazing, I feel awesome, yada, yada, yada. And then the second they step on a scale, and if it's a number that they don't want to see, everything that they just said, all that mental, emotional progress that they just expressed about how they feel completely goes out the window. And it just shows how like real even body dysmorphia can be, because it's like you could look in the mirror and like feel great about yourself or even internally feel good, but then you step on that scale, see a number, and it's almost like a flip switches, and you look in the mirror and could feel a completely different way. You could think you see a completely different person just because a number told you something. And that's allowing these external and outside factors to dictate how you feel internally, and that's crap.
Yeah. Because your health isn't determined by the number on the scale, and neither is your worth. And if you're thinking about this like, I could give up these things, sure, I'm willing to let that go, but I have to monitor my weight because what if I get out of control? That's where there's going to have to be some more like mental work before this would actually be effective for you, because that part has to be okay. Like it has to be okay if your body changes for the healing process. And it's not just going to be this forever eating and gaining weight situation. That's a fear, but that's not reality. So you can't fail at healing your relationship with food, which is probably my favorite part about this kind of work. Because if you're like a weight loss dietitian, people have failure, right? They have good weeks and they have bad weeks. But with healing relationship with food, first of all, you can always forgive yourself, which is encouraged because you have to keep moving forward. So I really don't see failure as a thing, and everyone's journey is going to be a little bit different. And I think that that can cause a lot of stress as well. Like, oh, like how am I going to be good at intuitive eating? That's not the point. However, there is a way that you can kind of like measure your progress, and it's interoceptive awareness. So the beginning of the intuitive eating book talks about how people who like can sit and perceive their heart rate are in tune with their body. So that's a way that you could measure improvement with intuitive eating, is if you sit and just, you can't be like touching any of your pulse points, but just sit and think, how many times did my heart beat in a minute, and then actually like measure how many times it beat in a minute and see where those match up. You are likely to be a stronger intuitive eater if you can notice those things. And so that's a really cool thing that they've discovered, like through studies that link those, because that's like a completely non-toxic way to measure that. And, you know, don't beat yourself up if that's not where you're at. That's not the point, but it's kind of something you could like see improvement on over time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so compassion, like you have to forgive yourself for your struggles and not being perfect.
Yeah.
If your body changes.
Yeah.
And so all of those things are going to be kind of necessary points to tackle in order to really be able to give way for this journey to start.
And don't expect perfection either in terms of like you embarking on your intuitive eating journey as well. Like if there's a day where like, you know, you do fall back into diet type habits such as tracking your food for a day or, you know, stepping on the scale, like don't shame yourself for that either.
Right.
Because it is a process and it is going to take some time to unlearn those habits and those ways that you're trying to maintain and keep this false sense of control.
Yeah.
But the more you extend that grace and compassion to yourself, the fewer and further those days are going to be where you're feeling like you have to jump on the scale to see where you're at, or you have to track your food, you know, to kind of check in with yourself. Like,
right.
They're gonna separate and slowly become, you know, further and further away from each other. And so it's just important to remember that, like, it's not perfect, but like Danielle said it perfectly, like you can't fail at this.
Yeah. And I think it's important too to remember, like, because our podcast is informational, educational, conversational, we're not offering individual advice. So like I would never come at someone I'm working one-on-one with, or even like in a group setting with the kind of like sass that I sometimes bring to our podcast, because we're just like informing people. Yeah. So that compassion, like it's probably the most important thing, and something that's why that healing is non-linear, because recovery is non-linear. Yeah. Like diagram is so important, because if you are expecting that perfection for yourself, you're going to just get more frustrated. And it's literally never the case. No one can be perfect at healing because that's not the point of it.
Exactly.
And that's something that makes it really cool in like my eyes. Yeah. And it could seem like that's an easier way rather than being super disciplined and controlled and willpower, yada, yada, yada. But it's actually like not, because it's hard work. It's just a different kind of work.
It's different.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about like my experience. When was this? Probably 4 or 5 years ago now, when I finally realized that I had to ditch diets, was when I was following this like clean eating meal plan that I've talked about before. And for some reason that didn't like click in my mind that this was anything to do with dieting, which is a reminder of how sneaky diet culture is, because you call something a different word than a standard diet is labeled, and suddenly you don't think that it's about dieting. It's just in the name of health. And to look like the person that's putting on the plan of eating too, which is super toxic. But I was told to cut out cheese, and I was like thinking, that stresses me out. I was like, the fact that this plan told me I wasn't allowed to eat cheese is making me feel like I want to throw away food that's in my house that like is not healthy for me. And I realized that trigger, because that was probably like a year and a half after I had stopped purging, and I realized that trigger, and I was like, holy crap, this is food rules. This is like, you can't do that. And that's like kind of what got me considering the concept of intuitive eating for myself before I even like knew that it was a text, because I learned the hard way there that was something like I had been doing healing work, and then I was triggered by that. But I think you can't stop yourself from being triggered by things, but you can work on reducing the amount of times that you like utilize that negative behavior that you're triggered to perform, like through the healing process. And the tools of the next 9 chapters are really kind of the how of how all this works. But this is the why, like why it's important. And I think ditching diets is a common enough thing to hear, but what does that actually mean? And when we talk about all this in depth, I think that a lot of people are still holding on to this. And there's a section that talks about pseudo dieting. And it's just these tiny little things that we do in our society that are just really toxic. And so I would encourage, like, I have no skin in the game. Like I said, I'm not a certified intuitive eating counselor. I have no affiliation with Evelyn Tribole or Elise Resch, but I really encourage this book. It's not expensive. It's $10 on, at least I don't think that that's expensive, but it's $10 on Amazon for Kindle, or it's about $15, I think, if you buy the hard copy. There's also an intuitive eating workbook that goes along with this, and I recommend that to my patients all of the time because it's like tangible exercises to do. But if I were to assign something to kind of explore why ditching diets would be worth it to you, is after thinking about all of these like negative things that can happen from dieting, like what benefit are you getting to your life by continuing to do that for yourself? And just like explore that, like talk to someone who you're close with about that, talk to your therapist about it, talk to your dietitian, your trainer, like anyone who's a safe person, your doctor, like, and just, it's just a curiosity, because when we start to do some of that self-exploration, I see people all the time like have that aha moment just by going back to themselves. Like, it's not about what we tell you to do that's going to help. And even if you get this book, it's that like internal work that you're going to question these things and see those changes happening over time. And you have to be fed enough in order to do this. So intuitive eating is not something that someone with a full-blown eating disorder is going to be able to walk right into. And that's something else that's important to discuss. But it is the end goal. Not everyone believes that they can do it, but generally speaking, this is something for everyone. Like, I'm sure there are a couple exceptions, like I said, because there's reasons why you could be disconnected from it from the beginning. And I haven't encountered any exceptions to that personally, but I'm sure that there are some people out there, but for the most part, this is the end goal. And it is super important and it matters. So I'm super pumped to continue going through these things a little bit more in depth, because then hopefully everyone will understand more why we promote intuitive eating. It's not some kind of weird cult following. It's literally just like coming back to your body to help you have peace of mind so you can use your brain and time to like do other things. And that's great. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you want to keep up with what we've got going on, please follow us on our joint Instagram account at FitFueledFree. My personal Instagram is dietitian Dani Cast, and Jenna's is JenEpFit. And we have a Gmail account, fitfuelfree@gmail.com. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns for us, you can also slide into our DMs if you want to get in touch with us. We always appreciate any ratings or reviews. We're also available on Amazon Podcasts now. That got connected. And we also record our episodes every week for YouTube if you want to like see our faces and eye rolls while we're talking and my dog coming in the room 100 times. So yeah, that's what I got for you, and we look forward to the next 9 episodes of this mini series on intuitive eating.
Bye guys.